What would it be like if I came to your office and I said, Dr. Wiss, I don't know, I just feel like these days I have a lot more anxiety and depression. What would you start asking me or what would you recommend to me?
Yeah, great question. I think before anyone even gets to that point of seeing me in the office, I've had someone fill out a lot of forms that look at health and health behavior. So I already have some really good insight into what's going on. I do practice nutrition, so I do tend to provide education related to some of these mental health outcomes. But I also, recruit other experts like psychiatrists and psychologists, therapists when there's a need. But if I were to look at something like depression or anxiety, I would really consider the biopsychosocial approach, which would mean I would first think about potential biological drivers, right? Starting in the gut. I think there was this monoamine hypothesis of depression that really focused on neurotransmitter dysfunction and especially serotonin, which led to a lot of the medications that are on the market. And there's a lot of other biological causes and consequences of depression. And I think the most noteworthy one is inflammation and oxidative stress. We know that low grade systemic inflammation that can accumulate over time has the potential to cross or disrupt the blood brain barrier. Most people are familiar with the term leaky gut. We now have this term leaky brain to describe what happens after long term exposure to an immune system that isn't working optimally. And there's a hot topic, which I've become very interested in, called neuroinflammation. And this is the potential for inflammation to pass this blood brain barrier by way of microglia and other astrocytes and other mechanisms that we're learning much more about, and to lead to changes in the brain, right? So depression also is associated with certain structural and functional brain changes, anhedonia, which is related to reward and the dopamine system. And so when we were thinking about the biology, I would point to interventions that could be helpful in terms of anti-inflammatory eating, moving people toward Mediterranean style eating. Everyone's different. Some people might need to do some blood work to look at their specific um, potential causes of inflammation. And then again, like the psychology of eating, the psychology of life. How do we bring in more joy into the process of being an eater? How do we get someone to get their hands dirty and get back in the kitchen and get excited about making food for themselves and for their people in their lives? I encourage people to get sunlight and get sleep and do the entire intervention on a entire physical dimension of wellness, right? And of course, thinking about social context, right? Like what are sources of excitement and joy? And, one of the biggest things I do with people, because I'll say this, nutrition education is helpful, right? You could tell someone about biological mechanisms, provide recipes. These are things I do all day long. But one of the most impactful things that I'm able to do is get people excited about going to the grocery store, cooking meals, and using it as a meditative and healing process. So most people are familiar with this domain of mindful eating. I sometimes teach people about soulful eating and getting back to nature and using meditation and using other mind body practices like yoga to cultivate gratitude and just connect to the plants and be excited about entering a new chapter and being able to face the world. I never pretend like nutrition is a sole intervention for depressive symptoms. But I can say that this year we have a systematic review that was published by O'Neill and colleagues in the Nutrients Journal, which looked at all of the randomized controlled trials of dietary interventions on depression. And these were studies that used food, not supplements, but used food to improve symptoms of depression without being focused on any weight related outcomes. So this is just singing my song, right? This particular paper looked at all 7 randomized controlled trials. And guess what was found? All 7 of them showed significant improvements in depressive symptoms. Okay, so there are people that have depression with other etiology. Perhaps it is more based in the neurochemistry related to serotonin, and people respond well to those medications, particularly the SSRIs. But there's a lot of people who don't respond well to SSRIs and need to think about nutrition, exercise, and other forms of wellness. And I think nutrition is going to get a lot of spotlight now that we have accumulating evidence to show that dietary interventions can actually be helpful. But my fear is that it'll be much like our earlier discussion where we get a finding, we know something helps, but it just doesn't fit well into the medical model and it falls under the wayside. So I'm here to scream it from the rooftop. I would like to recruit other people who are willing to have these conversations. There's a growing field called nutritional psychiatry. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, these scholars are much more prevalent in countries outside of the US. So
Right.
Canada, UK, Australia, a lot of the thought leaders in the nutritional psychiatry movement are outside of the US. So we need some vocal leaders here in the US to start talking about the links between nutrition and mental health.